Yeah, have you seen any trends in that, in waves, in sort of, it's gone really bad for a while and then it's good for a while, or?
Yeah, well, given the time we've been around, we've seen a couple of times when the quality of drugs went down or availability changed. I've never seen it been as bad as it is now, where we're testing a lot of raw powders that turn out to be anything but steroids. We're getting hundreds of raw powder samples that turn out to not be steroids at all. Well, we used to get a whole lot of raw powders directly from China, from the manufacturers or distributors, and that sort of stopped. Most of the anabolic steroid samples from China, they simply stopped coming. It's been mostly that particular people in China had been arrested, that had been involved with the biggest anabolic steroid manufacturing plant. And a lot of people went down with them, so everybody's pretty anxious about starting manufacture.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to the podcast with Dave Crosland. I'm Scott McNally, and all of our programming, it's brought to you by you, the people of Patreon. Thank you very much for your support. We are brought to you by evalbloodanalysis.com. You can get your lab work done by Dave if you're in the UK. And hey, if you're in the UK, you can get some great health supplements from Strom Sports Nutrition. They've got some great health stacks, especially if you're on cycle, and they're available here in the US now too. We're also brought to you by supplementsource.ca for Canadians. Great deals that change week to week in Canada. And of course, truenutrition.com. Use our code THINK to get 10% off all your basic bodybuilding supplements like protein powder, creatine, intra-workout, all of that. Dave, I am freaking pumped today. This is going to be epic. We have Peter Magic joining us from Janoshik. Dude, you are basically a legend at this point, Peter.
Well, thank you. I really do appreciate that. I've been doing this since I've been 17 years old, so it's quite a while for me as well. And I'm glad I finally made it to the legendary stuff.
How long have you guys been? Let me first say this. Let me just kind of give you a little bit of an intro. So, back when I was younger, we used to be able to test anabolic steroids domestically, not a problem. And we had a lot of peer reviews, people sending in samples, labs sending in samples. Around 2007-ish or so, we had something that went down called Operation Raw Deal. And as a result, a bunch of domestic labs were busted, and our ability to test anabolic steroids became knocked off. We were no longer able to do it. So basically, we're just kind of shooting in the dark here. It is a long period of time until Janoshik came out, but now we can send our stuff out to get everything tested and be assured that we're getting the quality, we're getting the safety that we want out of an unregulated, anabolic steroid. And that's where you come into play. How long have you been doing this for now?
Well, I'm not really sure if it was 2012 or 2013 when I started, but it's been roughly about that time. I would like to apologize for not being available right away in the 2007, but I was only 13. So that didn't work right away.
Yeah, no problem.
But I started doing this pretty young because I was into the powerlifting and bodybuilding scene a little bit. I had a lot of friends from the field, and they all had the same issue as you said. They had no way of knowing whether the stuff they were buying was the real deal or not, and like everyone, the constant worry was, what if it's something else? What if I'm going to grow huge tits, whatever? Nobody really knew anything, and they had to guess. So I figured this can't be that difficult. So I figured that at the local university, local, from a couple 100 kilometers away, they had the equipment. There was a friend who could help with that. So we started to do tests for friends for money, basically the expenses plus a couple of beers for us, just so they have a rough idea whether what they're using is what they paid for, what they expect or not.
Okay, and it just took off from there. It continued to grow. You guys are well staffed now. You're not alone here. You're running like all sorts of. I know you're running all sorts of tests. Can you give us some examples? Like, what are the most popular testings that you guys do on a daily basis?
Wow, there's 30 of us, over 30 of us at this point. Yeah, we receive hundreds of samples every day, so it's pretty crazy. And we most of the samples, over 70% or 80% of them, they're mostly peptide hormones, which became extremely popular in the recent years, especially with the advance of GLP-1 peptides, the weight loss drugs. So they are a huge part of our business, but the 20-30%, it's mostly the anabolic. It's the anabolic steroids, which are a staple. We're by far the biggest lab in the world who does anabolic steroids testing. In most of the countries, it's not even legally possible. There's only a couple of countries in Europe where it's actually legally possible to do this sort of tests, and there's only a couple of other labs that do this. So for us, it's mostly anabolic steroids, then it's the peptides, and then of course we do everything else that might interest people. We do hair loss drugs, we do a lot of experimental medicines. We're pretty famous in the orphan drug groups. Like there's people who have some sort of disease that the drug is not available for, but there are a couple of drugs that are being investigated, so they procure these drugs through various means, and they have us test them, verify whether they're really getting what they had custom made and stuff like that. We do a lot of interesting work in that regard. The steroids is always the 40-50 most common anabolic steroids all over again and again. And here and there you get an exotic ester here or something more rare. But the actual research sort of stuff, the actual difficult part of the business is dealing with the novel drugs and stuff like that.
All right. Yeah, I can only imagine how busy you guys are. And we've got a bunch of stuff where we want to dig into actually talking about testing. But before we did, with all of that said, do you see yourself as more of a scientist or a watchdog or an educator? Where do you see yourself fitting in our culture?
Well, I hope I could call myself a scientist. I don't feel calling myself watchdog is appropriate. That's not my word. That's not what I do. I just provide people with the results, and it's up to the people themselves to police the environment they are in. So I just give the information to people, and they need to interpret them, which I will gladly help. But it's still, there's always going to be stuff like, okay, he sent when the people will claim he sent in a different sample, etc.
Yeah,
we need more independent testing, blind test, and that's something that the testing institution is unable to provide. That's what the actual users, the people who buy stuff, who watch the reports, who get the stuff tested themselves, that's up to them. So I'm definitely not a watchdog. About Educator, I try to explain the testing to people so they can grasp on how it works, what's important for them, but still that's not the main thing I do. I just get in samples and try to provide results that are easy to comprehend. That's why we keep the reports really, really simple. And I myself prefer the science, to be honest, the most, dealing with the difficult samples, figuring something out. That's the stuff I love, and that's mostly what I'm doing at the moment. The routine tests, like the anabolic steroids test Enantate 250, that doesn't really warrant my attention at this point. We have excellent personnel that can handle the common stuff perfectly. Okay. If they're unsure, they run 20 more tests on it, so we're deep in red on that particular sample because we run so many tests on it, we run into negative profit, which happens quite often. When my staff doesn't like something, they prefer to overtest the sample, and I mostly deal with stuff when there's some issue that they cannot handle by themselves at this point.
Yeah. Have you ever had anybody come back with like they get a negative test? Have you ever had anybody like try to bribe you or threaten you or anything like that? Like, hey, bro, you can't put this information out there?
I'm not really sure whether it's been hundreds or thousands of times. So
And I know in the very early days there was a lot of argument around legitimacy. In the very early days when you were only 17, 18 and you first started, there were a lot of people questioning legitimacy over here. Obviously time has proven that to be incorrect, but at the time, obviously, people were like, oh, he's getting backhanders from labs, he's getting this, he's getting that. There were a lot of that floating around in the early days. But I think the consistency of the business, the fact that it's still here 12, 13 years later, is you've just out-traded a lot of that mistrust because you're still here, you're still going, you're still producing results.
Yeah, I mean, I do understand the skepticism because when I see new analytical labs pop up basically every week now, and roughly 95% of them are associated with someone, and I do understand the skepticism pretty well. I tried really hard to convince people back then. It didn't always work well, so at some point I just decided to go, okay, so time will tell. And then the year of 5 years, 10 years passed, and they're like, okay, so I guess time told. It's been a lot of people, they assume that I'm associated with someone, but it always turned out my customers, they come and go, the big labs. I've been around to see a lot of big names come and go. And everyone, when someone associated me to be associated with them, it turned out to be complete nonsense.
Because you're still here, they're gone.
Yeah, the bribes, well, it never really made sense to me because I was pretty proud back then, and I'm still am. So it never occurred to me to accept the bribe. I would think less of myself. I couldn't have that, right? But at some point the business turned out so profitable that it simply didn't make no sense to raise the business for any bribe. It's made no economical sense. Most of the labs, most of the manufacturers, distributors, etc., they're much smaller venues than my company at this point, and it would be rather difficult, not only risking the business, but we're an audited company. So it's not quite possible to accept the bribes for the company. That
no.
If I accepted bribes as a private person, that would be the best thing ever for the law enforcement, which doesn't particularly enjoy my line of business. And me accepting bribes, it would be illegal first and foremost. Second, they could accuse me of being associated with some black market. Vendors, etc., which could be interpreted in the court of law in a terrible way for me. So it's simply not worth the risk. But the people, they try to bribe me all the time. It's just it's pretty insulting at this point. But we just try to refuse in a calm manner. The actual business policy is to not let me to talk to people who try that, because I get angry easily. And we've used to got a lot of threats too back then, mostly a decade ago or so. But once people understood that it's not just it stopped being a one-man company, the people understood that if they try to threaten me, I can actually push back. I can actually report that. And if someone in the black market is threatening people from some company, the law enforcement is gonna take a bite at them.
Yeah.
And even if something happened, there's the company simply goes on. There's 30 people in here, and so sometime roughly 4 or 5 years ago, the threats, they completely stopped, or at least I'm not getting to the emails where people actually threaten us. I'm not doing the mails most of the time, so who knows what they're hiding from me.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Dave.
I'm sorry, if you don't mind. At what point did the company change from you and a mate in a lab testing for your friends? Did you get to a point where you go, you know what, there's a business here? Or did it just slowly evolve and then you were like, shit, actually, I've created a business? Because, I assume originally it wasn't particularly legitimized. It was just a friend testing when he could in the lab, and that was it. And then as volume increased, you were like, right, we need to get a little bit more organized, we need to get a little bit more legit. Or did you build it as a legit company from the ground up from the very first day?
Oh no, like I said, it's been mostly as a service to my friends. So we were doing it basically for being money. We had a couple of beers of profit, and that was it. But one of my friends from the US, he was like, okay, I'm gonna have this tested and that tested and even that tested, because you're cheap as a whore. And as an Eastern European whore. So, okay, bud, I love you. So it's not gonna be $20 for you, it's gonna be 60 per sample. And that's the exact moment it's turned into a business. He was pretty mad afterwards, but he paid nevertheless.
Hey, 60 would still be a deal. I would have taken that,
Yeah, but it's been pretty early on. It must be in 2013 at most. So, but yeah, that's when we started making some actual profit. And the people, my friends, they recommended me further. So I kept the price, and so we needed to deal with more samples, with more emails, dealing with more difficulties, so we charged the people more. And it was untenable to keep doing this in the university, so I started saving my share of the money, so I could start my own lab. And I switched from using the university labs to my own pretty early on. So that's where most of the money went, and that's when it transformed into the business.
Hell yeah. So back to the actual testing, and we were talking about like people that were getting results that they weren't happy with. Have you ever seen like really serious issues with a product, like contamination, something like totally wrong, something where the user's health could have been at serious risk had you not found this out?
Well, we're not seeing stuff like that often, but we've had some luck this very week. We had, I don't have it with me, but we had this Monjaro pen, tirzepatide in a pen, Quickie pen or something like that it's called, I'm not really sure. And we tested it, and there was no tirzepatide in there. And we were like, okay, that's weird, because the pen itself, it looked pretty well. We didn't expect it to be a fake. But we saw something in there, and we tried to figure out what it is, and it turned out to be insulin glargine. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right. I've never ever heard that word in English, but
a form of
it
insulin.
Turned out, yeah.
Wow.
It contained insulin. We don't know the dose. We cannot test the dose without having a standard for that one in a finished product. But insulin, while it is potentially lethal, we've seen some Ozempic pens that were relabeled insulin. So if you OD on Ozempic, you're in for a bad time. That's some nausea, bloating, not being able to take a poo for a week, but it's not gonna kill you. But if you screw up with insulin, there's an actual risk of death there. Yeah. So we've seen that. And then off the top of my head, it's not been a singular occasion where people who were actually manufacturing, clenbuterol tablets, they did not quite comprehend what microgram is, so they made 40 milligram pills, which could turn out to be potentially lethal as well.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm really glad that we caught sort of stuff like that, like when the actual manufacturer had it tested
Yeah.
before they put it on the market, and we're like, no, dude, stop this, don't let any of this get anywhere, because you're gonna be in for a very, very bad time.
Yeah.
So we do have stuff
You've
like
massively increased his profit margin as well.
Yeah, like one tablet will break down to an entire bottle at that point, you know?
that. Yeah. I mean, I'm really glad the guy who actually this happened to, he had a really good how do I put it? He was used to having everything tested before he sold it, and it saved his ass in this case, because you put something like this between the people, there's gonna be bodily harm caused, and there's gonna start an investigation, and he would get into a whole lot of trouble, and you don't want to do that to your clients, I assume. So we do see stuff like this.
That's
here and
incredible.
there.
Man. That's incredible. I want to jump forward and talk about a top. Before I do though, I do want to mention one thing. When we were talking about the bribes, the potential or rumors of, I would say this: the number one way to check you would be to do our own testing. If I sent you, let's say that you had a testing company that was, getting bribed. If I were to then buy their product or whatever, and then I send you an unlabeled vial, you can't know whose that is, and you're going to give me the result. So, like, I wanted to throw that out there, that we can keep you in check by doing our own testing and not just relying on COAs that we see online. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly. I always tell the people, send in blind samples.
Yeah.
Dilute the samples by yourself. I mean, you can put half cooking oil, half sample, and you'll know yourself. And then you send in the original sample too. And if it's not, the results don't match up, someone somewhere is screwing up.
Yeah.
Hey, what's going on, guys? Just a quick shout out to True Nutrition. I figured I'd bring you to the home gym here, so welcome. And I just wanted to show you my order. So nothing big deal. I've got a few pounds of the cold filtered whey iso. I'm a big fan of the cookie butter flavor. I've been on this year. This has been my favorite, but they've got a bunch of different flavors. So if you're interested in something else, just check them out. It's a very light protein overall. It's not going to bloat your digestion down. It's not going to cause a bunch of water retention. This is the kind of protein that I suggest to people who are doing a contest prep. They've got all your basic bodybuilding supplements like creatine. They've got great intra-workout, highly branched cyclic dextrin, which is the high end. And then they've got the cheaper stuff like Carbo Load, like anybody can afford that. And of course, use our code THINK. It'll get you 10% off. They really kicked up. It used to only be 5%. Now you get 10% off if you use the code. And it throws some money our way too, so it definitely helps the podcast out a ton. Might be a buck here and there, but if you guys all use the code, it definitely adds up. And you have been using the code, so thank you for that. Let's get back to the podcast, but thank you for hanging out with me here in the home gym.
What's up, Dave?
Very quick one. Have you seen a trend in... obviously there's probably going to be about a 10-50% margin on dosing, because it'll be I would have thought dosing would be quite variable. But have you seen any trends in the quality of drugs in general? So, obviously, more recently, there's been raw shortages coming out of China. So, have you seen an increase in incorrectly labeled or incorrectly dosed drugs more recently than you had, say, the previous 12 months? Have you seen patterns like that where there's a... Because I would imagine, and I don't know if this is particularly just down to you. Obviously, you are a large operation, but for a while, we've sort of seen, in general, from user feedback, we've had a fairly stable market when it came to quality of drugs. Drugs seem to be reasonably good.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, decent quality, well dosed. And then, obviously, with the shortages, things seem to have gone awry again. Prior to that, quality of drugs seem to be in the bin.
Yeah. Has that changed?
Yeah. Have you seen any trends in that, in the waves, in sort of, it's gone really bad for a while and then it's good for a while, or?
Yeah, well, given the time we've been around, we've seen a couple of times when the quality of drugs went down or availability changed. But to put it mildly, and excuse my French, in the past couple of months, it went completely down the shitter. if I may.
No, you're fair enough, mate.
Yeah.
I've never seen it been as bad as it is now, where we're testing a lot of raw powders that turn out to be anything but steroids. We're seeing a lot of vitamin E, tocopherol acetate, which is vitamin E, being sold as steroids. We're seeing paracetamol being sold as I don't know what, oxandrolone. We're getting hundreds of raw powder samples that turn out to not be steroids at all.
Wow.
Like we get an order of 20 samples of 20 powders, and not a single one of them turn out to be a steroid. So it's never been as bad as this. Everyone's pretty desperate to find some source of the raw materials. And then there's a lot of places, a lot of people who don't test, of who might have gotten, I'm hypothesizing here, but they might have gotten 10 bags of something. 3 bags turned out well and 7 didn't, but they didn't know because they tested only one of them. And then they make tablets out of that, or they make oils out of that, and then we're seeing oils or tablets that don't contain nothing at all. So what we're seeing right now with anabolic steroids, where it's complete mayhem. We've never seen it as bad as it is right now. The raw materials, there's real scarcity at this moment. That's been getting worse and worse. And so the development in the past couple of months, I would say it might be roughly a year. It's getting worse and worse.
Wow. Yeah, we've been, we've been watching that whole progression along the way, and we've been trying to track down like exactly what's going on. You know, we've heard all sorts of stories about this precursor isn't available. We've heard stories of that a lot of places in China are getting shut down, raw producers. Have you had any kind of insight into what the big change was all about?
I do have a rather good idea. It's been mostly that particular people in China had been arrested that had been involved with the biggest anabolic steroid manufacturing plant. And a lot of people went down with them, so everybody's pretty anxious about starting manufacture, keeping warehouses and that. Okay. I won't be putting out names, but it's mostly been caused by a single major arrest that led to many arrests in China.
Wow. Okay. Hey, that's some news for us, Dave, because we didn't know that. We've been trying to dig into this and find out. I know that, you know, having followed you and paid attention to things you know the work you've done, I've heard you say that US is your number one market, then China, where everything's being created, is number two. You know, what kind of changes are you seeing there? Are you saying like that some of the raw powders that they're directly sending out are coming back as bad from the source, or are you saying more that like the things that are faked or underdosed are people that received the raw powder and then send it to you?
Well, we used to get a whole lot of raw powders directly from China, from the manufacturers or distributors, and that sort of stopped. Most of the anabolic steroid samples from China, they simply stopped coming. So where we're getting most of the anabolic steroid samples is anywhere but China.
Wow.
Basically, our anabolic steroid orders or analysis orders from China, let's say they dropped to 5 to 10% of what they used to be compared to a year or two ago.
Yeah, which is huge considering the amount of work you guys are doing. Now, I mean, are you seeing anybody else pick up this slack, like Turkey, India? Are there any labs in other countries that are, so nobody stepped up to the market yet, huh?
Exactly. There's been no influx from manufacturers from any other country so far.
Wow, this sounds bleak, Dave.
Quick legal question, if you don't mind. In the UK, obviously, the law around steroids is a bit unusual. Testing samples provided by a private individual is no problem. Perfectly legal. That can be done easily over here. Where it gets tricky, and this is the bit that I found interesting, there would be a potential viewpoint here that if you were receiving raw from a manufacturer that you could be implemented in supporting the supply. Has that been? Do you have any legal grey areas around actually receiving the raw powders, or is that just it's fine? It's because of the volume of the sample is quite small.
While the volume of the sample is quite small, we don't need a lot of sample for the testing. And the law here, we have the paperwork for unlimited import, export, handling, and everything of this. So if I wanted to import 50 tons of trenbolone right here, right now, there would be no legal way to stop us from doing so.
Right, okay.
We of course don't abuse the system because we want to keep the relationships with the authorities as good as possible. We don't screw around like that. But technically, the paperwork we have is completely unlimited in every possible regard.
Okay.
Yeah, because I know that it was never tested, so no one knew if it would really be, but the general consensus was if you started receiving raw as a testing lab here, that they would implement you in supporting the supply.
No such thing over here. We
so
receive a whole lot of raw materials. Some here and there, a simple mistake, like instead of sending 1 gram of the sample, we receive like 1 kilo. It happens here and there. And the customs, they know because all our mail we received with a lot of scheduled chemicals.
Yeah.
And the customs, they check each and every mail of us, and we need to declare it properly. So they know exactly what we're importing. Because we need to keep the evidence of imports, getting rid of the samples, archivation, etc., etc. So we do produce roughly 10,000 pages of paperwork a week.
Oh, God. Thank God you have like 30 people on staff, because that doesn't sound like the fun part of the job.
That certainly isn't.
I've got one more question on the issue with raws currently. How common is it to see like a pristine Primo sample and Masteron Anesthetic? Because I'm seeing those as being the two most difficult ones to get. And from my end of things, I'm seeing a lot of labs that aren't carrying it. I'm seeing labs that are doubling their pricing. I'm seeing labs also that are saying, hey, there's no problem. We're going to sell it to you at the same price it's always been, which definitely raises my eyebrow.
Well, there's this major issue with the fact we don't know what most of the anabolic steroid samples are supposed to be. We push people strongly towards sending those blind, so we don't know if the oil was supposed to be 32 milligram test propionate or 100 Primo, but we can guess that it was not supposed to be the 30 milligram test P, but so for most of the samples we don't know. We don't want to know what it's supposed to be, because if we don't know it and we tell the people, it increases the trust in our work. But generally we're seeing the Primo and Mast, they're faked a lot less than one would assume.
Okay.
I mean, I like to tell this story a lot, but your biggest risk of getting fake Primo is getting those cool tiny Rimobolan amps from Bayer. If you're getting those, you're putting yourself in a huge risk of getting cooking oil in a while in an expensive ampule.
Okay.
So a lot of those we're seeing, they contain nothing but oil inside. So that's an interesting tidbit of what we're seeing. But generally, the Mast and Primo oils, they're not faked more than other oils. Of course, there's a bias. If the people are already sending the samples to us, then they're the people who know that there's possibility of testing stuff. Then the people who can use the internet, the Google, to look for the reviewed sources. So there's a bias that what we're seeing is cream of the crop. We're not going to get an oil being sold in some back alley, which. So there's a huge bias in this. So we're seeing cream of the crop, but from what we're seeing, the Mast and Primo oils, they're not faked more than any other stuff.
Okay, and that's assuming that, yeah, so that makes sense as long as that's what they're in. If I'm sending you something and you tell me, hey, you got 250 milligrams test sip on the nose, but I'm saying, oh man, that was supposed to be Primo, that's another story, right?
Yeah. We only want samples to be labeled by numbers like 1, 2, 3, A, B, C, D, F. We don't care. The less we know about the sample name, the manufacturer, the batch, the less typing there is for us when issuing the report. So
all right,
we enjoy that.
One last question too is, what's one thing that you wish the steroid using community knew about, basically doing the things that we do, using the things that we use to reach our goals in bodybuilding when it comes to PEDs?
Well, what I'd like to tell people is that you only got one health, so stay as safe as possible and really consider what you're doing, what's necessary, etc. Just there's you can always do more anabolics later on, but you can save up health once you screw it up. And the simpler you keep stuff, the better for you. But also, I'm a huge fan of not touching anything that doesn't have at least 40 years of medical research on humans. The testosterone, human growth hormone, even insulin, they're extremely well researched compounds. People know exactly what happens when you use them, etc., what risks they carry. They're well-known compounds, but in every field, in bodybuilding especially, you get new compounds popping up every year that's supposed to do something interesting, cool, but just those molecules are not studied. The people cannot know what really are the long-term effects of doing that, what unresearched stories might be. The most worrisome trend I'm seeing in every community around is that they hop on every new stuff and they don't consider the risks. So with the anabolic steroids that are well researched, if you really do need to use them to achieve your goals, just stay as reasonable and as safe as possible for people. Like the risk of you getting random liver or kidney cancer from testosterone or stuff like that are almost nil, but getting it from research compound something, I don't want to mention any names, but there are some well-known ones that people suspect of being pretty risky in this regard.
Yeah.
So basically, don't try to reinvent the wheel. Just stay as safe as possible. I don't feel like I should be advising people too much. I just give them data they have available, but oftentimes I see people doing really on the internet. I try to keep in touch in the community, and I see people doing very worrisome stuff, which they could fix in ways that are not as risky towards their health or anything.
Yeah, and that's a big message that we try to send home too. If people are interested in getting testing, if they want to follow along with any work that you're putting out, what are the best ways to, number one, work with you, and number two, follow what you're doing, any releases that you have on reports and stuff like that?
Well, we don't really have a unified channel for communication with the people. We hope to have a new website soon, but it's been like going to hell and back again with trying to get an eShop running. But so far, the best way to get in touch with us and do business is to simply mail us at info@janoshik.com. That's where we handle. We have a team of people handling the emails, so they handle orders, they handle questions. They try to avoid as many questions as possible because we're not really qualified to provide advice on cycles, on health stuff, especially not the mailbox girls. And we cannot, a lot of people there ask us for recommendations on brands and everything.
Yeah, I bet that's a big one.
yeah, and we try to tell them, like, no, we really can't do that, what sort of a testing lab would advise. If a testing lab is advising you, is recommending someone, that's a big red flag for me.
Yeah,
That's okay.
Yeah.
They're gonna be there's like 95% that this lab is going to be associated with them. You see it all the time. There's a testing lab nobody ever heard of, but from out of nowhere, some lab manufacturer vendor, they pop up, and all their testing is from this single lab nobody ever heard of.
It's all 100% too. Every product.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean,
All right, Peter.
I must admit, I won't recommend branding or anything like that in the coaching and stuff, because it's like you say, you're guilty by association then.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But you also lose your professionalism as a testing organisation. It's like when we do the bloods, we don't recommend any brands. We'll recommend types of supplements to support health, but we won't recommend brands.
Yeah, exactly.
To me, then, if you're recommending a brand, then people are going, why you recommend that brand? Is it because you're getting paid by that brand to do that? So I'd rather recommend the ingredients that make that product, and then they can go and source the product they want.
Yeah, not only is it very unprofessional, given that these are scheduled compounds most of the time and everything, it could put us in a legal responsibility sort of situation. So I would like to avoid it too. But the biggest part for me is it would be unprofessional.
Send them my way. I'll deal with the cycle questions.
Well, thank you for taking the time to hang out with us, man. We understand that you're super busy over there. This has been extremely insightful, man, and we both really appreciate it. I'm sure that our listeners are going to appreciate it too.
Well, thank you too. It's been a great pleasure talking with you. Okay,
guys, we've got Peter Magic here from Janoshik. Head over, get everything tested, be safe. And for another episode of the podcast with Dave Crosland, I'm Scott McNally. We'll see you soon.